Hey class, it's Mr. Jones. I'm just going to do a quick little run through of slides 10 through however many we have left. Um, but instead of just kind of talking about it, I hope that it should let me type. Let's see. So I'm just going to type these out and explain it so that way you all not only have to, or you all can hear what I'm saying, but you can also visually see what I'm saying. So I hope this will make it easier for you all to follow along whenever you all are watching. So we're going to start with the protagonist. The protagonist in any story is always the uh, main character in a literary work. So basically, the main character in a novel, in a short story, in a poem, anything. But common misconception about how to spelling here. Whoops. Um, about 95% of the time, the protagonist is generally the good person, the good guy. But it's not 100% always the case. If you remember, if any of y'all have seen Breaking Bad, Walter White is not always known as the good guy. The Grinch Stole Christmas. Those are two just examples of the protagonist not necessarily being the good guy, quote unquote, but about 95% of the time that is the case, but it's not 100% of the time. So, misconception: the protagonist is not always the good guy. Think Breaking Bad or the Grinch. Okay, so we're finished with that part. This is just going to be, like I said, a quick run through. Hopefully, it'll be kind of review terms for you all. All right, so now let's go to the next one. Well, there it is. Okay, antagonist. So the antagonist is a character or force in conflict with the protagonist. So basically, it's always going to be protagonist versus antagonist. And a common misconception here, I'm sure y'all can kind of guess what it is the antagonist is not always the bad guy. But like I said, about 95% of the time, this is the case, but not always. The antagonist is, that's not it. Not always the bad guy. So we got protagonist and antagonist, two main characters. Well, the protagonist is the main character. The antagonist is the character in conflict with the protagonist. So, okay, sorry, my computer's being goofy. Okay, so next, let's go to static/flat character. So first, I'm going to do this, but let me see if I can find one. All right. Well, I'm just going to try. There's a flat line. It's kind of a generic flat line using a lot of the dashes. But you notice how in this flat line, nothing changes. There's no life to it. So that's what considers it a static. A static/flat character is basically a character who has no changes, no really. They just basically stay the same the entire literary work, whether it be a novel, short story, poem. So that'd make them uncomplicated. Traits that do not change throughout a course of work and are not surprising. Sorry, my typing's really bad. It's a late at night. All right. So basically, if you're static or you're flat, they kind of go together. Then you're just a character who doesn't change throughout a story. You're kind of boring. Think about it like the flat line I just did with a bunch of dashes. That's not changing. And static flat characters aren't changing throughout the course of a work either. But let's do the opposite of that, and let's put in, let's see here. Let's put in a circle. So that's going to be different because you look at a circle and it's constantly moving. They're changing. So that's the difference between a dynamic and a round character as opposed to a flat or a static character. So a dynamic one, as you can probably assume by the circle and by my explanation, complex characters that, oh, come on. Okay, there we go. That undergo development and sometimes surprise the reader. Not surprise, good grief. So, like I said, a flat or a static character is not going to surprise the reader because they're going to stay the same. They're one-dimensional. They're going to stay the same throughout a text, and a dynamic round character is not going to do that. So, like I said, think about a circle for these, something that's round, as opposed to a flat line for a flat character. Okay, so that's it for our type of characters. So now let's go into characterization. Like I said, I hope this is a review, but this is something that's really important for short stories. We all, authors always really like to build and develop characters using characterization, both the direct and indirect, which we'll go into in just a second. But characterization is simply the way a writer creates or develops a character. Like I said, this can be direct or indirect, which, like I said, we're going to go over in just a second. But characterization is simply the way a writer creates or develops a character. So direct, you all know what direct is. You're direct. You're to the point with it. So the author directly states or describes a character's traits. And the example here, Jennifer is a mean woman. She does not like anyone, and no one likes her. So instead of, kind of beating around the bush, they just come out and say it. Jennifer is a mean woman. As opposed to indirect, which I'm going to go to right here in just a second. We're going to skip this example. We're going to go back to it. So indirect, an example would be, "Scram, kids," said Jennifer. The children scattered immediately and hunkered behind their desks, only daring to glare at the teacher from afar. So they don't come out and specifically say that Jennifer is a mean lady or whatever the example was in direct characterization. They give you an example or a clue, but you all have to kind of infer that or come up with that conclusion yourself. It's not directly stated. So that's the difference between direct and indirect. One's direct is directly stated, and indirect is it provides clues for it. So the author provides clues about a character by describing what a character does and says. Oh no. As well as how other characters react to him or her. So a lot of times I always give this example whenever I'm in class. I remember my first year teaching. I was grading a lot of paperwork, and so my desk was full of just papers. And the example I gave was direct characterization would be a student being like, "Hey, Mr. Jones, you're a slob," because you're coming out and saying it. as opposed to indirect characterization, meaning like, wow, Mr. Jones has a ton of papers on his desk. We're not coming out and saying he's a slob or anything like that. They're just giving you clues that you all have to think about, and then you all come up with that realization. You all come up with that. It's just not directly stated. So that's the difference between direct and indirect. I hope that makes sense. But if it doesn't, like I said, you can just shoot me an email or anything or sometime. Okay, choose an adjective from the list and write a sentence about a character using direct characterization. So look at my example from the last slide. So the example from the last slide, Jennifer is a mean woman. She does not like anyone and no one likes her. So what you all are going to do is you're going to pick one of these adjectives up here and use that to describe a character. It can be someone you know or just some character you just made up off the top of your head. So, for example, Billy Bob was happy because yada, yada, yada. So, on this, you're just directly coming out using an adjective from up here. So, happy wasn't up here, I don't think. No. So, we can, so that was just the example. Make sure that the adjective that you use is from up here. Use one of these words and just give me a brief example right there. Like I said, I don't need a paragraph. I literally just need one or two sentences, just like this example. So you guys are doing that there. We went over indirect characterization. And now there's an example for indirect characterization. So we're going to use the same character that you used or you created for this example. You're going to use your example here, or the character in your example, and you're going to go back here, and you're going to do the exact same thing, but instead of directly coming out and saying it, you're going to indirectly come out and say it, if that makes sense. Instead of coming out and saying how your character is angry or jealous, you're going to provide clues so that way we have to come up with that conclusion. So, like I said, I hope this makes sense. It shouldn't be anything. It shouldn't be like a page long. A lot of times, some people make indirect longer than direct just because you need to provide. Sometimes they want to provide more than one clue, and that's okay. But like I said, it shouldn't be too long. You just put that example right here. If it'll work, right there. All right, so now let's go to point of view. This shouldn't take too long, but the biggest thing I want to hammer before I get going is the biggest thing with point of view is a lot of times readers or students don't want to read the text. They just want to scan the text, look for pronouns, and if they see I, they're like, oh, well, it's first person because I see the first pronoun I see is an I, and they just automatically assume that the point of view is first person. Or maybe they see you and they're like, oh, well, it's second person. Or maybe they see he, she, it, they, and they're like, oh, well, it's third person. So, biggest thing is you all have to at least read the text because we have to get the understanding or the familiarization of where the narrator or whoever's telling the story, their role in it. So, basically, the biggest thing to be able to identify point of view is identify first off, is the narrator in the story or is the narrator outside the story just telling the story from afar? If the narrator's in the story, then that's automatically going to make them first or second person. And then you all can go back and just read it and get a better understanding, use pronouns, and be like, oh, well, that's second person. Or, oh, that's first person. But if the narrator's outside the story telling it from afar, then it's going to be third person, which can be limited or omniscient or objective. But we'll go into the different types of third person here in a second. So first person, biggest thing is we just need to know these pronouns down here. Pronouns are things like I, me, my. Oh no, didn't mean to do that. I, me, my, mine, we, our, ours. All of those are pronouns because they specifically just replace a noun. instead of saying Mr. Jones, I might say I. That's all. That's all I'm meaning by whenever I say about the pronouns. So the story is told from the viewpoint of a character in the story. And that character refers to himself or herself as I. So, like I said, biggest thing, notice whether the narrator is inside the story or not inside the story. And then we go back and use pronouns. So, first person is going to be I, or me, or my, or mine, or we, or our, or ours. Second person is you or yours, and that's generally about all the second person pronouns you're going to be seeing. So, second person point of view. Sorry, I'm having to go back to my notes because I have all these written down. Is when the narrator refers to one of the characters or the reader as you. And you notice here, I don't know, let me get that up. And I'll go there. Important. It does not count. Actually, I'm going to bring that one up. Dang it, go up. There it is. Important. It does not count if the characters are saying you if they are not also the narrator. So if a character is talking to another character and saying you, then it doesn't matter. If they're talking strictly to the narrator, then that's whenever it matters. And that's the importance of going through and reading the text and not just scanning for pronouns. Because if you're just scanning for you, you're going to see that and you're just going to be like, oh, well, second person. But in all reality, it's just a character saying that to another character. So that's one of the other reasons why it's important to read the text. So third person, this is whenever it kind of gets a little tricky because third person has all the same pronouns. He, she, it, they, a character's name. But there are three different types of third person point of view. There's omniscient, which if you all know what omniscient means, omniscient literally means all-knowing. So this story is told from the viewpoint of a narrator who is outside the story as opposed to inside the story like first and second person. And what I mean by all-knowing, and the narrator is all-knowing and all-seeing. What I mean by that is the narrator knows what every character in the story, what they're thinking. They're not just saying what they're doing. They know what they're thinking, and they see everything. It's not told through the viewpoint of one character. It's told through a viewpoint of someone who knows it all. As we go on throughout this unit, I'm going to provide examples, and we're going to read text and label them, and I'll be able to show you the difference between omniscient and limited, or omniscient and objective. So next is third person limited. Remember, we still have the same pronouns: he, she, it, they, character name. But the difference here is the narrator's outside the story and uses the third person pronouns such as he or she to refer to the characters. basically they're not all knowing. Let me type this out. Sorry. If I can get my notes situated. Told from the limited viewpoint of one character. That's the important part, you all, is one character. They're not all knowing. It's literally, the narrator's literally knows about one character. I'll just control B. One character. However, the narrator is outside the story. And uses the third person. Pronouns. Not whatever that word is. So remember, third person pronouns are he, she, it, they, a character's name. Those are your third person pronouns. So last one is third person objective point of view. And all that is the story is told by a narrator who's outside the story, just like all the other two, and who cannot see any character's thoughts or feelings. So cannot see any character's thoughts or feelings. So omniscient. Oh, don't. Okay. Is all characters. Limited. One character. Objective. None. So I hope that makes sense. We'll kind of go over that later on. Like I said, kind of go over that just within itself, but I wanted to at least introduce you all to it. But now we're going to go through some of these different literary terms. So the theme. The theme is the main idea of the literary work, usually expressed by a general statement about life. For example, if love, you can look at this little example right here. If love is a topic subject of two novels, a major theme in one of the novels could be love, if taken to extremes, can be negative rather than positive. Instead of just coming out and it being strictly the main idea, they generally express it in a general statement about life. So if I'm doing this, I'm putting the main idea of a work, usually expressed by a general statement about life. Okay, so that's what I'm putting for theme. So mood, we talked a little bit about mood last unit, but mood is simply the feeling that is created in a literary work that is felt by the reader. So a lot of times the mood could be happy, sad, depressed, angry. It's just all how a literary work makes you feel as a reader. That's what mood is. So now let's go to tone. And tone is simply the writer's attitude toward his readers and or subject. So the tone's a lot easier to understand, through words, because a lot of times you can just tell if someone's angry. They might raise their voice or say something snappy or say something quick. But in text, you have to be observant and be looking for it. You have to try to understand or get the feeling of the writer's attitude toward his readers or the subjects, which is basically like the reader or the subject they're writing about. How does the writer feel about his readers or about the subject he or she's writing about? Okay, so let's go to suspense. It's getting almost Halloween time, spooky season, so we had to include suspense in here. So suspense is growing curiosity. Spelled that wrong. Didn't need to put that U in there. About the outcome of a literary work. And the little example here, think of the moment you are on the edge of your seat while watching a movie. You don't know what's going to happen next. That's what suspense is. Is it suspenseful? If it is, then it's probably going to be a pretty good movie because it's keeping you guessing. Okay, so foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is simply the use of clues. The use of clues to suggest future events in the narrative. Or it could be in the movie or in the poem. You see foreshadowing in a lot of different things. So it's just basically the use of clues to suggest future events. So, like I said, I think that's a pretty well-known word, but I just want to introduce you all to it. Flashback is exactly what it means. Flashback is when an author presents material that occurred earlier, that the present tense of the narrative. So basically, a flashback is just when an author refers back to something that has happened in the past. For example, a scene from a character's childhood. That's one of the biggest flashbacks during movies or TV shows is that that example right there. So all it is just an author referring back to something that has happened in the past. Dialogue. Dialogue is a conversation between characters which is designated with quotation marks in a story. So, come on. Okay. Conversation between characters which is designated with quotation marks in a story. Y'all, biggest thing, I know that you all know that quotation marks show dialogue, but whenever you all are in your writings, include dialogue or include quotation marks whenever you are quoting dialogue or whenever you're quoting something. Don't just type it in there. Always use quotation marks. Go ahead and get in the habit of it now, so that way 2 or 3 years down the line, you all don't make a goofy mistake just because you forgot to put them in there. So there's dialogue and dialect. Living in Kentucky, this is a very, very common thing for a lot of us. We just a lot of times don't even know. Dialect is simply a way of speaking. That is specific to an area or region. You know how Kentucky is, but you go to Boston and they pronounce Boston like Boston, but they probably come to Kentucky and hear us talking. They're like, "What the heck?" But whenever we go to New York or Boston and we hear their accent or dialect, then we're like, "What the heck?" And it's just because we're used to it. So that's the thing about dialect is it's a way of speaking that's specific to an area or a particular region. Okay, so symbol. Symbol is anything that represents something else. So the American flag is always known as a symbol of freedom. The American flag by itself, maybe to an outsider, it's just a flag with 50 stars and red and white stripes. But to us, it's a symbol of freedom. The flag represents something else, and that something else is freedom. So that's all a symbol is. I think in 8th grade, y'all read To Kill a Mockingbird. And if y'all remember, the mockingbird was a key symbol in that story or in that book. I'm not going to give you all any spoilers or anything because I always refer back to that with symbol. And I'm sure we'll go over it later. But mockingbird and How to Kill a Mockingbird is a huge symbol in texts. And the flag, American flag being the symbol of freedom, is also a common symbol known especially in the United States. So next is satire. So you all, satire is a literary work that ridicules. So I'm just going to type it out. Literary work that ridicules the foolishness and thoughts of individuals in institution, society, and even humanity in general. Y'all, satire is something that is more like a comedy because it's making fun of something. For example, a lot of people make satires about. All I know is The Onion is a common satire. Is a website that's full of satirical text that you all can find that kind of makes fun of or pokes fun at maybe some of the common things, common events, common news going around in the world today. Satire is not meant to be taken literal. It's kind of meant to be more humorous, to draw attention to a subject or to draw attention to a point from a different standpoint as opposed to always being serious and, straightforward. Satire is kind of making fun of something and trying to provide some comic relief to it. All right, so now let's go to irony. Irony is simply a difference between what is expected and what really happens. So a lot of times people are like, well, that's ironic just because, maybe that was the last, whatever just happened was the last thing that you envisioned happening. So if that's the case, then you're using ironic in the right context. So let's say you were imagining, I don't know, something bad happening and then something good happens and in your mind you're like, oh, well, that's really ironic. That's the definition of irony. Just the difference between what is expected and what really happens. So we can use our, okay, go to the next one, please. There it is. So verbal irony is the use of words, hence the word verbal, to mean something different than what they appear to mean. And I'm going to post standalone links for these videos so you all can watch them. The link, I'm hoping the video works for you all by just clicking in here. But like I said, in Google Classroom, I will post a standalone link to those videos so you all can watch them. And hopefully that will provide some examples for you all that will make more sense. So verbal irony is just the use of words to mean something different than what they appear to mean. Situational irony, on the other hand, is the difference between what is expected to happen in a story and what actually happens. So but all of these ironies kind of tie along together because it all stems from the word irony, which is a difference between what is expected and what's really expected. Um, Situational is just obviously based on the situation. Verbal uses verbally or verbalized words. Um, and dramatic irony, let me click there, is the audience is more aware of what is happening than a character. So you all, biggest thing about the ironies is take the time. I don't think any of these videos are too long. I'm sure my video is the longest one y'all have to watch today, and I'm sorry it's so long, but I wanted to at least go over these with you all. But like I said, I'll post standalone links for these 3 videos and the one for dialect up here. Um, I think you'll like the one for dialect because it's kind of funny. You get to hear dialects from other parts of or other areas that maybe you're not too familiar with. But I would highly recommend y'all watch these 3 videos. We're gonna do more with irony, I promise you, like before our test. But I just want to kind of introduce you all to these 3, or to these 3 different forms of irony. So you all, I know this was a lot, and this is a very long video, and I do apologize. I just wanted to go over all this with you. I hope all of this makes sense. And if you have any questions at all about anything, maybe you want some more um, explanation about one topic or something, shoot me an email. I'll be glad to make a video of me explaining something, more in depth, and I'll just send it to you. Or if you just want to send me an email asking me a question, feel free to. My email is Kellan, KELLAN.Jones @Pulaski.kyschools.us. I hope y'all have a great day today. And like I said, any questions or anything, shoot me an email. Thanks, guys.